And this is during a time in the middle of the week when people, we don't really have a lot of options. Going to school, going to work, things happen during the morning, especially during the work week. And that's when we find ourselves head on with this heavy storm with rain and wind along with movement of people. And that's my primary concern, is literally driving in it. Now, even if you're kicking it at home and you don't have that situation, with the wind, we could be looking at momentary power outages. Also, just things like clogged drains in your neighborhood might be a thing where you get ponding and roadway flooding. So these are the things that are going to pan out over the next several hours. Now, Friday, we've got a little bit of leftover action in the morning for some scattered light showers. But in general, we're clearing up, and nothing compared to what we're dealing with through our Thursday. So let's go ahead and back things up so you can get a wide look at this. The incorrect way of looking at this storm, because usually they form out in the Pacific and they have this quick motion from the ocean out toward the east. This one's a little bit different. It's grinding out here in the Pacific. It's pulling in a lot of warmer, moisture-laden air here, so that's why our temperatures are up, and there's a lot of rain potential. So this is the movement of the storm for us today. It's what's coming from the south, as there's very slow movement from west to east. So in other words, it's going to linger where it's set up for the rest of this morning at least. And that steep angle, north and south, means that it's going to retain a lot of the warmer air through much of the day for the higher elevations. When we look at this with your traditional winter storm, there's this division with valley rain and Sierra snow. But as you can see, it's only for the highest points in the Sierra at this point. It's mostly just rain. Rain for Truckee, rain for South Lake Tahoe. Very high snow levels initially. Once the sun goes down and the colder air gets pulled in as well in the middle of the day, we're going to see that change, but it's going to take a while. Heavy rain in the Bay Area, heavy rain for San Jose, and there's still more to come. So this is, the early days of this system that's going to be taking shape. Temperatures in the 60s that will eventually rise to the maybe mid 60s. And this is earlier in the day. In fact, we're going to be hitting our high temperatures right around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Usually it's over here, and that's when the cold air gets drawn in. In other words, we hit our cooling trend in the middle of the day, because this is your classic cold front with cold air still moving in. So we've got rain through the rest of this morning and early afternoon. I paused it at 6 p.m., so this is a little bit after sunset. We're essentially clearing up in the valley spots, still raining in the foothills, but it's rain, not snow. The snow does not happen until later on in the evening, just as the system is leaving us. Now, there's still some moisture trying to kick around, so I can't rule out a random sprinkle. And then through the day on Saturday, we're mostly fine. Saturday evening, a new system starts to take shape, which will be bringing rain chances for us during the day on Sunday. So these are the things that I'm mostly concerned about: a wet commute, clogged drains, ponding spinouts, and lots of wind, debris, and outages. They're going to be localized. We're not expecting a massive windstorm, but it's absolutely going to be windy as that front is pushing through. And remember, it's more rain than snow. So this is a weather impact alert day for all of the reasons that I listed. And finally, again, we're not totally out of the woods, because we've got another system coming in late Saturday through Sunday.
Hi, everyone. Good morning to you. We've made it to Thursday, and with it, we are 1 day shy of an atmospheric river arriving in Southern California that's expected to bring a fair amount of rain to us over the course of the weekend. Today is our final day of dry skies on our Thursday before that wet weather arrives into early Friday. Take a look at the coastline over the next 12 hours. Temperatures have been able to stay really mild all through this week. Earlier in the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we woke up each morning to some dense fog. This morning, we did not have as much of that fog present, but we're still holding on to really comfortable conditions into the afternoon stretch. By the noon hour, could get as warm as 72 degrees out by the water under partly cloudy skies. Inland will likely be in the upper 70s this afternoon, and then those clouds start to reconvene by the evening, just past sunset, setting the stage for the arrival of that rain. Let's time it out for you. This is one of the most coveted graphics when it comes to how to explain this storm, because there are so many questions around it. This is likely to be our first major storm of the fall season. We had 1 day of wet weather in October. That's been since the water year began on October 1st, and it didn't bring us much. This one expected to bring us between about 2 and 3 inches in total, although I will say these models do tend to adjust often. When we look at the rainfall forecast going into late tonight and early tomorrow, it's the light stuff. This is about 2 a.m. You only see green on the screen, and we also see some pretty frequent breaks in it. 9 a.m., some wet weather coming through San Diego, moving up to about Palomar Mountain. You can see how we'll likely be dry around that stretch, the 9 a.m. morning commute in Oceanside, same down toward the South Bay. So a little bit more scattered as opposed to widespread. Then as we go through the day on Friday, we'll get those breaks embedded in it through about 10 p.m. Likely that we might even see a little bit of sun peek through the clouds over the course of the day on Friday, and then watch what happens late Friday night into early Saturday. All that wet weather starts to really move in along the coast with more moderate to heavy bands associated with it. That's the yellow and orange. It intensifies through the day on Saturday, where we see our best opportunity at some thunderstorms arriving. That's that red, that kind of quick moving red that you see over the course of the afternoon hours on Saturday. This will all continue into early Sunday. Looks like we'll mainly have scattered activity around that day, but it will still add on to our totals. So all through the day on Friday, this is just past the midnight hour on Friday night into early Saturday, our totals are not all that tremendous. We're at about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 1/2 an inch, 3/4 in Oceanside and Carlsbad. But if we push all the way through Saturday into early Sunday, we get up to 2 inches. If we push through Sunday into early Monday, we get up to 3 inches in some spots. Oceanside, 3.1 inches, 3 inches in Ramona. Most other spots beyond that are going to be right around 2 inches, although Chula Vista could stay right around the upper 1 inch range, about 1.9 inches. In the meantime, this afternoon, Thursday, like I said, comfortable 70s, a couple upper 60s out by the water, maybe even hitting the low 80s in El Cajon, and then cooling down day over day as the storm arrives. One of the starting blocks of that will be wind, especially out toward our local mountains and deserts, starting this afternoon. And then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday are all weather impact alert days, meaning that you might want to adjust any outdoor plans that you have over the course of this weekend to account for that rain. As we get into early next week, it does seem like Monday, Tuesday, a lot of that wet weather will linger. We shouldn't have huge additional quantities of rain, but might add on to those totals steadily before we encounter our next dry day after today by the time we get to about Wednesday of next week. Temperatures across our mountains could get cool enough to sustain a dusting of snow, but otherwise it seems like this will be mainly a rain event for the mountains. Lightest accumulations will come over the deserts. Hope you all have a wonderful Thursday.
We have many weather alerts that are issued throughout the country. We're breaking down what they mean because there are different levels of severity. There are advisories, watches, and warnings, and each of them are to be viewed differently. Advisories just mean be aware that conditions are starting to come together. A watch is be prepared. Let's say have your go bag ready if it's flooding or wildfire. A warning means take action. Whatever you've done in preparation, do it now. Either evacuate or head to higher ground. Whatever the warning is issued, you want to make sure that you're ready to go at that point. Breaking down a look across the country. Now, the National Weather Service is the responsible body for issuing any watch, warning, or advisory throughout the United States. In fact, it is key to their mission of protecting life and property. And that's what they consider first and foremost whenever they're going to be looking at a severe weather event or potential, even something that may seem a little bit on the lower scale of severity. If it is going to be impacting life and property, that means the National Weather Service will be taking note and determining what kind of alert they'll be issuing. The process depends on a couple of different things and the type of hazard. As you can see, there are many shades across the United States, and at any one time, there can be several alerts that are being issued. Some of them will come from a national agency like the National Hurricane Center, and others may be coming from a local office. And each of those are divided across the country, all of whom are answering to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So let's break this down here on the small size. And small in size, but they could develop quickly. The process is going to be a little bit differently than, say, a larger in size hazard. So let's just look at the small in size and developing quickly scenario. The warning process, we're going to rely on observational data. So forecasters in the local office will be looking at different types of tools, observational data, as well as Doppler radar, ground-based sensors, and those types of hazards may be something that would be severe thunderstorm or a flash flooding event. A forecaster will heavily rely on their local knowledge as well, because as we know, the topography throughout the United States and even in certain regions for that forecasting office can vary greatly. So we'd want to look at how that could play a role in the warning process. Their local knowledge may include knowledge of creeks and streams and how much capacity of water those can hold, or what's the how are those streams and creeks already faring? Are they full from a previous event, or are they dry because we haven't seen a whole lot of rain in the previous week or so? So that is going to be a small in size, develop quickly type of warning process, hazard type, as well as the local knowledge and how that plays in to issuing a watch or warning. I mentioned some of the tools that are used. This is a Doppler radar, and you can see how we've got kind of these scans going around. These are really finely tuned precision notifications and bouncing back of what kind of moisture is in the atmosphere and the severity in which is happening within the atmosphere. So they can even scan within a cloud bank, and a radar screen would bounce back and show what is actually going on in that storm, the rotation that is happening. Is there a potential tornado? Is there hail, lightning, things of that nature, which would definitely cause concern and start the process of potentially warning on a particular storm. You can see there's also snow in the Sierra that these radars can pick up. So there's a lot of different types of weather events that the radar can pick up. Again, this is a finely tuned tool that is at access to meteorologists for the warning process. Let's look at large in size, slower development. The warning process, we're relying on forecasters to use and interpret numerical weather models. So these are going to be larger in scale. They're not the microclimate type of events that we would use for a Doppler radar. These are going to scan a state, a region, the Pacific, the Atlantic. These are going to be much wider scope here. The hazard types would include things like hurricanes or winter storms or dangerous wind events that may be percolating in the background that need to be watched. So a forecaster will use a combination approach. Here's what I mean by that. They're using those computer-generated outputs, but also looking at conceptual models and statistical output. What is the likelihood at that point in the season or year that this event would be taking shape, as well as what does it actually mean to the local environment? So what has been happening before that may play in to what may happen in the event that these larger scale events could be happening. One that comes to mind would be our fire danger. If a large wind event were to develop, say in the middle of winter when we've had a lot of rain, that might mean we don't need a fire weather watch. But as we head closer to the end of our dry season, soil moisture is very low, fuels are critically dry, a wind event would mean a forecaster would need to issue a fire weather watch or a red flag warning. So you can kind of see how seasons play into this as well. Here's a look at one of those models that we might use as forecasters. And again, the National Weather Service is going to be the issuing office, but forecasters at local media outlets will also use things like this to just be on the alert. Something may be issued in the coming days. This is a look at how the atmosphere is responding and forecasting how it will respond to different weather systems coming through, how the heights in the atmosphere are changing. Is the air going to be sinking and warming or rising and cooling? And that really helps us to figure out how weather systems will be playing along with the jet stream or a storm track. How is that going to be moving the storm systems around the United States and a global weather pattern as well? This is a look at our satellite and radar, which again helps forecasters to drive into another one of the tools that we'll use for those alerts. And you can see how our jet stream is favoring these low pressure systems and driving them across the United States. And that's just one of the ways that we start to get some clues as to what may be coming our way. Locally for Northern California, these are some of the ones that you might be familiar with. Winter alerts. Now, these could be issued days in advance, and it really does depend on the time of year because a weather event early in the season may be a reason to have a winter storm warning or a watch, whereas deeper in the season, that wouldn't necessarily meet the criteria. So it really does depend on the time of year. Winter weather advisory, winter storm warning, winter storm watch, and blizzard warning. Our freeze alerts. Now, these could be issued also days in advance based on the local criteria and time of year. Also, where the location is, because a temperature of 32 degrees in the Sierra isn't necessarily going to mean a freeze warning in the middle of the winter. But for the valley or during peak growing season, a 32-degree temperature for over extended period of time is very concerning and needs to be alerted. Fog alerts. Well, we have our dense fog advisory. Now, those could be issued days or hours in advance or as warranted. Sometimes fog develops very quickly, and so those dense fog advisories may be issued with just moments' notice. Flood alerts, these are also varied. Could be issued days in advance, but it's really based on hydrologic conditions. I mentioned a moment ago that if we're looking at an event that is going to produce a heavy amount of rain, but we haven't seen a lot of rain in days past, we may not be looking at a large-scale flood event. But if the ground is saturated, our reservoirs are full, and there's a lot of snow melt coming down the hill, that means we may need a flood advisory, watch, or warning, or even a flash flood warning. Flash flood warning is usually issued with very short notice just because of a lot of rain, short period of time, and people need to seek higher ground. Our wind alerts, those are also going to be based on local criteria, could be issued days in advance. We've got the wind advisory, high wind watch, high wind warning, and extreme wind warning. And of course, that could play in greatly to our fire alerts based on local conditions and weather, fire weather watch, and red flag warning. Our heat alerts, heat is the #1 killer, weather-related killer. We've got our heat advisory, excessive heat watch, and excessive heat warning. These are really based on local criteria and time of year. A heat advisory in the Bay Area may mean those temperatures are only about 85, 90 degrees, and that wouldn't necessarily reach that threshold for the valley, but in the springtime, a 95 or 100-degree temperature certainly would be cause for concern in the Central Valley before our bodies have started to adjust to some of those extreme temperatures. So again, we have advisories, be aware, watch, be prepared, and warning, take action.